All right, let's get into it. Today, we're going to dive into a real scientific detective story. It's a fascinating one that connects the immune system, a super important nutrient, and a nearly forgotten drug to a potential new path forward for some kids with autism.
I mean, that's a huge question, right? And it's really at the very heart of this story we're exploring. We're going to unpack the science behind this whole idea, which suggests that a very specific biological mechanism could really change how we think about a subset of autism cases. You know, for as long as we've been studying autism, one of the biggest challenges, one of the biggest puzzles, has been understanding and improving communication. It's this massive, complex thing that researchers and families have been trying to solve for a very long time.
And look, this isn't just some abstract science experiment. For millions of families, this is their life. It's this deeply personal search for ways to help their child find their voice and connect with the world. And that search, that drive, is what powers all the research we're about to talk about.
So where did this new clue even come from? Well, you might be surprised. It wasn't by looking at the brain directly. Nope. It was by looking at how a really important vitamin gets into the brain, or in this case, how it gets blocked.
Okay, so first things first, we've got to talk about the key player here, folate. You might know it as vitamin B9, and it is absolutely essential. The brain needs it for, well, pretty much everything. Building DNA, making the neurotransmitters that let our brain cells talk to each other. You get the picture. Without enough of it, healthy brain development it's at risk.
Okay, so that's where things get really interesting, because this leads to the core problem we're talking about, a condition called cerebral folate deficiency, or CFD. And here's the crazy part. A child can have totally normal folate levels in their blood test, but their brain is literally being starved of it. So you're thinking, wait, how is that even possible?
Well, it turns out the whole thing is an autoimmune issue. It happens in two steps. First, the body's own immune system messes up and creates these things called folate receptor autoantibodies. You can just think of them as these rogue guards. And then step two, these rogue guards go and latch onto the folate receptors, which are basically the doorways into the brain, and they physically block the folate from getting in. The door's locked.
Up to 75%. That's the number that really got everyone's attention. Research suggests that up to 75% of kids on the autism spectrum might have these folate-blocking antibodies. I mean, think about that. That's not some tiny fraction. That's a huge majority. For researchers, that was a jaw-dropping discovery.
And the real takeaway here is huge. If you have a specific biological marker that's showing up in so many kids, it starts to tell you something really important, that autism isn't just one single thing. It suggests there might be these distinct subgroups, each with different biological causes, and maybe, just maybe, different targeted treatments.
So, if you have a specific problem, like a blocked receptor, that points to a potential solution, right? And this is where the story gets really unexpected. The answer might come from an old, almost forgotten drug.
Okay, so to get how this works, you've got to know that not all folate is created equal. The standard stuff, folic acid, that you get in most supplements, it needs to use those main doorways, those receptors, to get into the brain. But then there's something called folinic acid. That's the stuff in a drug called leucovorin, and it's different. It's already in its active form, so it can use other back doors and side roads to get into the brain. It can completely bypass that main blockade.
Yeah, the detour analogy is perfect. Think of it this way. The main bridge into the city, that folate receptor, is totally blocked. Leucovorin is like the delivery truck that knows all the secret side roads. It can get that essential folate right where it needs to go, to a brain that's been desperately missing it.
And you know, this drug, leucovorin, has had a wild history. It was first approved way back in 1983, but not for this. It was for helping with chemotherapy side effects. Then, in 1999, the original company just stopped making it. Not for any safety reason, just because cheaper generics were out. And now, here we are, decades later, and it's being looked at for something completely new. Talk about a comeback story.
So, what was it? What was the evidence that dragged this old drug back into the spotlight? This is really the turning point of the whole story, where we go from a cool theory to actual clinical trials and, believe it or not, government action.
Okay, so check out this quote. It's from a major study back in 2016. And this wasn't just any study, it was the gold standard, a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial. You can't get much more rigorous than that. And the conclusion was crystal clear. The kids who got the folinic acid had significantly greater improvement in their verbal communication compared to the kids who just got a placebo. And when you actually look at the data from that study, it's pretty striking. Over 12 weeks, you see the placebo group had, a tiny little improvement, but the group that got the folinic acid, a much bigger jump in their communication scores.
This is exactly the kind of clear, hard data that makes regulators sit up and pay attention.
And pay attention they did. Big time. Based on this study and a growing pile of other evidence, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, and the Department of Health and Human Services did something, well, something pretty major and kind of unusual.
What they're doing is initiating the process to officially update the drug's label. They want to add the treatment of cerebral folate deficiency, that's the very same condition linked to these antibodies, right onto the official uses. That is a huge deal. It's a formal recognition of a brand new use for a very old drug.
But you know how it is with science? It's never that simple. With any big new development, the excitement and the promise always have to be balanced by some serious caution and a call for more answers.
So on one side, you've got government agencies like Health and Human Services looking at this and getting pretty hopeful. They see the potential for this to have a really big positive impact on a lot of people, especially since these antibodies seem to be so common.
But then, on the other side of the coin, you have major medical groups like the American Academy of Pediatrics pumping the brakes. They're saying, hey, wait a minute. These early results are promising for sure, but there are just way too many unanswered questions to start recommending this for everyone.
And the questions they're asking are really important ones, like who exactly is this for? Is it for every child with autism or only the ones who test positive for the antibodies? What's the right dose? How do you even monitor patients to see if it's working or if there are side effects? And the big one, don't we need bigger, longer-term trials to really confirm all this and make sure it's safe in the long run? All totally valid, critical points.
You know, this whole conversation, this whole debate, it really fits into a much bigger shift that's happening in autism research right now. We're moving away from a one-size-fits-all approach. You see these massive new data science initiatives, like the one from the NIH, pouring in millions to try and understand these differences, to look at genomics, environment, clinical data, all of it, and see autism not as one condition, but as many different conditions under one umbrella.
And that really leaves us with this one big, fascinating question. Whether leucovorin turns out to be a massive breakthrough or just one small piece of a much larger puzzle, does this whole story signal the start of something new? Could this be the dawn of truly personalized medicine for autism, where we can finally match the right treatment to the right person based on their own unique biology? It's a powerful thought to end on.